Meter is defined as a systematically arranged and measured rhythm in verse, and it is a very critical point in literature. One of the most well-known forms of meter is iambic. Iambic meter follows the pattern of unstressed then stressed syllables. The main idea behind iambic is that the meter will sound like a heartbeat. Oftentimes, this will be used in dramas by a main character that is meant to evoke feelings of sympathy from a reader. For example, William Shakespeare often used iambic quite a lot in his form of iambic pentameter. Now, iambic can be seen in his main character Prospero, but other characters that didn't seem as lifelike, such as the monster Caliban, would not use it. Let's see iambic pentameter in an example from Shakespeare's work. Listen to the following sentence very clearly and note the stressed and unstressed syllables. What's he that wishes so? Now, all syllables in this sentence go from unstressed to stressed. And with like, it follows a very rhythmic sort of pattern. What's he that wishes so? Another widely used form of meter is anapestic. The basic definition of anapestic meter is two unstressed syllables followed by one stressed, da-da-dum, as opposed to da-dum, as we've seen in iambic. The meter was originally a Greek marching beat, but later adapted by Roman and Greek playwrights. Oftentimes, this meter is associated with comic writing or children's stories. For example, it's most famously seen in the stories Twas the Night Before Christmas and Dr. Seuss stories. Another form of metrical foot is the trochee. The trochee is the inverse of iambic meter, if you would, in that it goes stressed then unstressed, as opposed to unstressed stressed. The only real way to tell a trochaic from an iambic is to examine the first foot in a verse, kind of telling where that first stress comes from. Common songs that use the trochaic meter are Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and Baa Baa Black Sheep. As is pretty evident when you actually hear it out loud, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. All of the stressed syllables come first and the unstressed come second. The trochaic is meant to have a sort of rolling tune when it is read or spoken, giving it a soothing tune, very similar to the anapestic meter we saw previously. Lastly on our discussion of metric feet is the dactylic meter. Dactylic is a meter that people often hear in music and poetry quite frequently, but rarely identify. Dactylic often has to deal with the length of the syllables and how they fit together in a verse. A dactyle is a set of syllables that contain one long syllable or a stressed syllable, followed by two short ones. In poetry, dactyls are often followed by a trochee within a line of verse. A good example of a dactylic meter followed by a trochee is in Walt Whitman's poem Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking. The title itself is an example of a dactyl paired with a trochee. Later in the poem, Whitman goes on to use two dactyls followed by a trochee while saying, "Out of the mockingbird's throat, the music shuttle." Dactylic meter is often used and goes unnoticed. Most people think it is rarely used meter, but actually it is used often and gets unidentified. Now that we've discussed the different forms of meter that can be used, what is really the point of utilizing different meters in the form of writing? Well, as we discussed, each meter has its own different purpose in the terms of writing. For example, when we discussed Anapestic, we realized it had a more childlike quality, relating to fantasy and less to the form of reality, while when we discussed iambic, we talked about how it was relative to a heartbeat, and was often used for a protagonist or character that an audience was supposed to relate to. This can be seen in multiple instances of literature that use different forms of meter or no meter at all. Like I said previously, Prospero, the protagonist of Shakespeare's The Tempest, does use iambic pentameter in his speaking, while his antagonist Caliban, on the other hand, actually doesn't use any meter at all, rather choosing to speak in prose. Because of this, his speech feels a lot more impeded and less rhythmic than Prospero's, making us want to side with Prospero as opposed to this malformed creature. Ultimately, meter can be a very useful tool at a writer's disposal if they know what they are doing. With that said, thank you for watching, and I hope you learned a little bit more about meter.